All right, we should be live.
Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a great Saturday morning, and thank you for joining us today to talk about wage theft enforcement in the city and county of Denver. I'm Councilwoman Stacy Gilmore, and I represent District 11 for the city and county of Denver, and that composes the majority of the Montbello community, Green Valley Ranch, and then Denver International Airport. And we are excited to be here today to talk with you about this proposed legislation and hear your thoughts and ideas and questions. And this has been a long time in the making around talking about this subject. And so excited to get started with it. And we're going to do introductions, and I'd like to turn it over to Council President Torres.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jamie Torres. I represent West Denver's District 3. I'll pass it over to Councilman Sawyer.
Good morning, everyone. Amanda Sawyer. I represent East Central Denver District 5, and I will pass it over to Councilwoman Sadabaca.
Good morning, everybody. Candy Sadabaca. I represent District 9, which is all of near Northeast Denver and downtown.
And good morning, everyone. Alan Shabaga, Assistant City Attorney with the Denver City Attorney's Office, and I support City Council.
And then we'll go ahead, and I want to acknowledge, she didn't introduce herself, but want to acknowledge her, Katie Heidman. She is the Chief of Staff, Senior Counsel Aide for Council President Torres's office, and has done so much work on this legislation. And so really want to acknowledge her work and partnership around this. And so we're going to have a full agenda for you this morning, and we're going to start out with a little bit of housekeeping so you know what to expect this morning. And so we're going to talk about how did we get here? What is wage theft? Why is this a priority in Denver? And what will this proposed legislation do? And then we'll have time for question and answer. And I also want you to know that we have another town hall scheduled on November 29th as well. And so there'll be another opportunity to talk more about this subject. And we ask that you submit questions via the Q&A feature, which is on the bottom toolbar towards the right side of your screen there on the bottom for Q&A. And we'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation, but know that if you pose additional questions and we don't have time to get to them in this session, we'll follow up via email. So you'll make sure and get the information. We're going to go to the next slide here and talk a little bit about the process thus far. And as we were talking about this and putting together the PowerPoint presentation, it gave me an opportunity to go back and search through my notes. And this was something that our clerk and recorder Lopez, when he was rounding out his final term as clerk and recorder, had asked me to attend a meeting so that I could talk with folks from the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades and folks with Colorado Jobs with Justice. And that was in the spring of 2019. And I think when he invited me to that meeting, I was like, yes, of course, I want to make sure workers get paid in Denver. That is what has been the vision the entire time of this legislation. And I have to thank my colleagues for keeping that vision at the forefront. But I didn't realize at the time he was passing the baton on to me, saying, I'm not going to be able to do this in my time in office, Councilwoman, and I want
Did we freeze up?
Yeah,
Yes.
Councilwoman Gilmore is frozen for me.
Okay.
Same. You want to take
Councilman
it?
Sawyer, do you want to take it? Because you really took it from there.
Sure, absolutely. So apologies for the tech glitch, and hopefully Councilwoman Gilmore will be back in just a minute. But yeah, so Councilwoman Gilmore really picked up this process right as we were coming into office July of 2019. So the early fall of 2019, we got together and it sat down to hear feedback and stories about exactly what wage theft is, how it is affecting our workers in the city and county of Denver, and to start talking through how to potentially solve this challenge that we're seeing. So we started with these conversations way back in the fall of 2019. And then when Councilwoman Gilmore was council president, I actually ended up taking over from her as well. And so, all of these meetings were online for so long because it was the stay-at-home order. And then, throughout 2020, we really met with all different kinds of stakeholders, not just our union stakeholder representatives, but also, other kinds of organizations that were interested in wage theft and finding out how this legislation might affect their businesses and sort of how it would be enforced. We really looked at the process of wage bonds first. And it wasn't until late 2020 and early mid 2021 that we realized that the gap here really made more sense to go, across all industries within the city of Denver and really make sure that we're supporting all workers, because we see wage theft happens in a number of different industries. And so we didn't want to, we heard feedback that wage bonds might be targeting specific industries. And we really wanted to kind of take a look at it, make sure that it was across all industries, protecting every worker in Denver. And then our city attorney's office and Anshul was a big part of the legislation as well, worked to institute criminal wage theft. But we felt that there was still a gap after the criminal wage theft legislation passed, because we really wanted to make sure that our workers were getting paid, and that is a civil remedy. So we worked with the auditor's office. Unfortunately, Jeff Garcia, the executive director of Denver Labor, couldn't be with us today, but he will be with us at our next meeting. And so we really took this to broaden it. We really want it to be a civil process across all industries and protecting all workers of Denver. And so here we are today, 4 years into these conversations, having shifted quite a bit since that time when we started in the fall of 2019. So that's, I think, a little bit about the process, and of course you can read the slide. So next slide, please. And Councilwoman Gilmore, Councilwoman Sadabaca, is this one you? All right.
This is me. I'll take it from here.
Okay, I'll pop up.
Thank you for covering that previous slide. I have the pleasure of illustrating the problem for you. And I think one of the best ways to illustrate the problem when we have such a technical piece of legislation here is to hear a story about how it affects individuals. So we're going to start first with a story from Adriana Moreno, who is a Colorado Jobs with Justice worker or leader. And she will tell you a little bit about her story, and it'll be interpreted by Alexis Hernandez.
No, Adriana, I've allowed you to speak. If you could just unmute yourself, that should work.
Hello, can you all hear us?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Here we have a usted habla español, ¿verdad? Sí. Sí.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Adriana Moreno. Yo estoy aquí porque yo fui una persona que me robaron mi salario. El problema, perdón, tengo aquí 3 años en Denver. El problema empezó yo estaba trabajando para este lugar, es donde venden pollos, y seguido faltaba dinero, todos los días faltaba dinero, todos los días faltaba dinero del corte de caja. Entonces, un día esta mujer dice que me faltaron, la encargada dice que me faltó dinero y que yo tenía que pagar ese dinero. Yo le dije, no te voy a pagar nada porque no faltó nada. Y ella hacía lo mismo todos los días con las demás personas y las demás personas, si ella decía, siempre faltaban de 50 a $200. Las demás personas sí le pagaban el dinero. Yo me rehusé a pagarle el dinero porque yo sé que no estaba faltando el dinero lo estaba agarrando ella. Entonces, yo le dije que no le iba a pagar y como no le quise pagar, me despidieron y no me dieron mi cheque. Yo hice la denuncia a una organización hice la denuncia y pero pues como estábamos en pandemia, tardaron muchos meses y no contestaron, no estoy segura si fueron más de 6 meses. Y entonces yo dije, no, pues voy por mi dinero y otra vez fui y me trajo como una semana dando vueltas y por fin me dio mi cheque. Y esa fue la razón por que me quitaron el trabajo y porque no quise pagar el dinero. No es justo si tú estás agarrando un dinero. Yo le dije, tú lo estás agarrando, necesitas más dinero, trabaja más, pero no estés, o sea, no se está robando a todos los demás, no es justo. Entonces, yo quiero que eso ya pasa, es muy común aquí en Denver, en cualquier restaurante, que si no les das la gana, no te pagan, te roban tu salario. No, eso no está bien. Necesito que pongan más atención a todo esto, porque no es un lugar, son muchos, muchos lugares que yo les puedo decir. Entonces dicen, te van a pagar un salario por decir 19 y te pagan a 18. Luego hay otro lugar que dicen, te voy a pagar el 15% de las casas que limpies y son 750. Tú haces tú haces tu cuenta y resulta que no, que te están pagando como un 10%. Entonces no, son demasiados lugares, la verdad. Al menos yo he tenido muy malas experiencias y sí me gustaría que pongan atención a esto por mí, por la demás gente que lo trae en el banco, un pobre hombre, $2,000. $2,000 no le pagaron. Gracias.
Ahora voy a interpretar lo que dijo Adriana. Sí, yo he estado aquí en Denver. I've been here in Denver for 2 years. And I was working at a restaurant. I was a cashier. And I got fired because they didn't want to give me, they accused me of stealing as a cashier, of stealing money from the cash register. And I was not, they didn't give me my check. There was an organization that I went to, and so that they could help me get me my check back, but nothing happened. It took me more than half a year until they gave me my check. And, you know, we have to pay bills. You know, as a cashier, they kept telling me that I was taking money, but that was not true. And, you know, I wanted to sue them, but they gave me my money back. And I can see that in Denver, this is very common. They steal your wages, and I can tell you the places where this happens. I know them, and they say they're going to pay you $19 an hour. They're actually paying you $18 an hour. You know, people who clean houses, their wages are also stolen. So this is a very common problem, and something needs to happen. Thank you.
Thank you for the story and the interpretation. So as you all have heard, this is one example of wage theft, but wage theft can happen in a variety of different ways. And what it means overall is that it's when a worker is paid less than their full wages to which they're legally entitled. And that can happen in a situation like the one we just heard, but it can also happen with overtime violations, off the clock violations, meal break violations, illegal deductions, or even employee misclassification violations. It's It's a serious problem, as you heard from the previous speaker. 750 million in legally earned wages is stolen from Colorado workers each year. And 1 in 10 workers, especially low-wage immigrant and female workers, are the ones who are most affected. And nearly 70% of low-wage workers in large metro areas suffered at least one pay-related violation in their previous week of work, not year, but week of work. It happens in every single industry. It's important to know that the federal top violators are accommodations and food services, manufacturing, construction, retail, trade. We have another story from Alejo Gonzalez that we're going to hear. And so, Alejo, if you can tell us your story. Alejo is a SEIU home healthcare organizer and will share another instance of wage theft with us.
Good morning, buenos dias. My name is Alejo Gonzalez. I've been a labor organizer here in Denver with SEIU for 4 years, working with janitors, clinic workers, security guards, mental health, and home health care. And this is just like a little portion of the labor world that I've worked in. And what ties them all together is wage theft. Throughout my years, home care is a particular industry that is just rampant with it. The obstacles to get back earned wages, the lack of clarity on who to reach out to, and then the lack of clarity on company policies have really built barriers for workers that make it almost impossible to receive the wages they worked for. And to note, in home care, this is a community primarily of women of color, about 8 out of 10 of them, who are single parents, about 6 out of 10 of them. A worker who helped start the home care organizing here in Colorado, her name's Marilyn, is unfortunately an example of what happens everywhere in home care. When she brought it up with an organizer that she had been told she would get travel time and she didn't, and that she was being told that she had to stay with a client to work longer and not getting paid for it, talking with an organizer, she decided it was time to report it. Between the time that happened to now, with so much back and forth with CDOE and an employer accusing her of wrongdoing, it has been almost 2 years since her wages have been stolen and she hasn't seen a nickel. On top of that, the employer has laughed away any wage theft cases because even he knows how long and ineffective the process is. She didn't even care when she said that she was going to report it. And another worker that really comes to mind, her name's Mia. She had quit an agency, and when she finally got her check of the last month that she worked there, it bounced. When she tried to reach out to the company, guess what? The company was now closed. She now had nobody to talk to, no company to accuse of stealing her wages, and nobody to figure out how to get it done. When you're working minimum wage in Colorado, and then a whole month of income of yours is gone, what are you supposed to do? In Mia's case, she became homeless in between jobs because her employer stole her check. So I really beg the people, please understand that these two stories are not unique in any way. This happens in every industry, every day. To the baristas that serve you coffee, to the restaurant workers that feed you, like Adriana, who was talking earlier, and the healthcare workers who we call hero the entire pandemic, like Marilyn and Mia. Unfortunately, I don't really have enough time to share every heartbreaking story I've heard. And so I really hope that this is enough to get you all to believe the reality of the billions of dollars that are stolen from workers every day because of wage theft. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Alejo. And I will kick it on over to Councilwoman Torres to dive deep into the policy.
Thank you so much. And thanks again to Alejo and Adriana. I really appreciate you sharing what you've experienced with us. So what does the language in the ordinance actually say, and what does it cover? We looked specifically at revising its section 58 of the Denver City Code. And with the image shows you what currently exists in the code. Chapter 58 is broken into 3 articles, and they generally cover some general provisions. Article 2 covers minimum wage, and then Article 3 covers worker retention. These have been revised, and Anshul, I'll give you the bulk of the credit for having really looked deeply at this particular chapter and tried to make it both more clear and more specific for the 2 laws, the minimum wage law that is in place and this wage theft law that we're proposing, so that Division 1 covers the provisions that are both common to minimum wage and to civil wage theft. Section 2, Division 2, covers just minimum wage. So the things that are unique to how the auditor in the labor division enforces that. And then Division 3 would be specific to wage theft and how it may differ from minimum wage and have its own unique provisions. Anshul, anything else on this area that you might want to mention?
No, I think you covered it, Councilwoman.
Okay, perfect. So the policy itself is administrative pathway. So there already are criminal and kind of court pathways for folks to seek remedy for wage theft, but not an administrative one. So we would be asking under current standard for a worker to obtain a lawyer, to file a suit, to go a very kind of process and very burdensome process when we can build an administrative pathway right here in Denver, because we are already doing that for minimum wage. So we benefit greatly from a platform and a foundation that's already been established. So Denver and Colorado, we already cover criminal penalties for wage theft, but we want to make sure that we're avoiding additional barriers and even threats of jail time so that workers can get paid more quickly. We want to make sure folks have a reason to come to the table with the city to find remedy and be able to get the workers paid. So the policy itself provides both restitution and protects independent contractors. So the payment of withheld wages would include a 12% interest, and then it includes independent contractors who are working as employees. Sorry, my dog is barking in the background. So that's important and specific to what we experience as wage theft, because independent contractors are often how workers are misclassified. So why? So workers are owed promised wages for wages for labor performed, and employers won't be able to avoid paying owed wages by classifying a worker as an independent contractor rather than an employee. We see this misused across the board. So it's not all contract disputes that would become wage theft disputes. The ordinance would be limited to cover only independent contractors working for employers who have employed several other independent contractors to perform similar work. So this would ensure, for example, that a restaurant isn't sued for wage theft because it hasn't paid its plumber. But it would be the case if it hadn't paid several of its workers. Anshul, anything to add on that?
No, I think that covers it also, Councilwoman.
Perfect. And I think I kicked this over to Councilwoman Sawyer. Nope, I still have this one.
Yep, you've got one more, but I'll take it.
So this I think is one of the most unique pieces, and this is what will be exclusively in Article 3 about wage theft. And so it holds employers up the chain accountable for paying workers. This would allow the auditor to seek restitution for a worker from wherever in a chain that can pay. The auditor would start with the direct employer and then may move up the chain link by link. That I think is an important one, especially for some of the examples that we heard this morning where an employer has bounced a check, they aren't reachable, or they're just refusing to cooperate and be responsive. If they are in a chain of employment, this is something that the auditor can move through.
All right, I think we're to my slides now. Thanks, Council President Torres. So want to talk a little bit about the penalties, right? The auditor may order 3 times the stolen wages or job reinstatement or a fine up to $25,000. That does not mean that will happen, right? The purpose of this legislation is to get our workers paid. And if someone is is not able, forgets to pay or isn't able to pay by accident, you know, that's not what we're talking about here. If a claim is filed on something like that, the auditor has the flexibility to be able to, you know, work with an employer, because the goal here is to ensure that our workers are getting paid. So there are fines for failing to certify a payroll or providing false information, and especially important fines for retaliation. But those, you know, are I think already in existence, and you know, under our wage theft, our minimum wage policy. So you know, the specific kind of flexible penalties for wage theft are really the ability for the auditor to order the 3 times the stolen wages job reinstatement, or the fine up to $25,000. Next slide, please. Also want to note that the policy establishes the ability for a worker to have a private right of action. Excuse me. So a worker may choose to bring a civil action in court rather than go to the auditor's office and file their complaint that way. And that's, you know, an option of the worker, right? Because the worker has received the injury, the worker hasn't gotten paid for the work that they have done. So this gives the worker also a little bit of flexibility and some options. So if the auditor is unable or unwilling to investigate for whatever reason, the worker still has potential recourse to ensure that they're getting paid. Next slide, please. All right, so who does this apply to? Let's talk a little bit about, I think we've heard a lot of questions kind of about up the chain liability, right? So this is going to apply to employers who are operating in the city and county of Denver. And that means anyone who's employing a worker acting in the interest of an employer. So that could be a corporation, it could be an association, could be an LLC, a business trust, a nonprofit, is applying to anyone in the city and county of Denver who is employing a worker. Anshul, do you have anything you want to add here?
Nope, that's exactly the language in the ordinance. So I like it when we copy the language from there.
Fair. Great. So let's talk next about kind of the details of this. What happens if there's an honest mistake, right? These penalties are at the discretion of the auditor. I mentioned a couple of slides ago, the auditor may order penalties. That doesn't mean that they have to. And certainly, you know, if there's a mistake, and a complaint is filed, then the auditor's office has the discretion to work with the employer and get it taken care of. And again, the point is to get our workers paid, right? We really want to focus on those penalties being directed towards people who are intentionally withholding wages, or refusing to cooperate with an investigation, or refusing to fix issues that have been identified and investigated and proven within 30 days. So those are really the people we're looking at focusing on. And again, with the eye to our North Star here, which is making sure that our workers can get paid so that they can put food on the table and pay their rent. You know, we talk a lot about ways to address homelessness, you know, earlier in the process. And this, I think, is one of those important ways to do that. So next slide, please. Is this one me as well? Let me take a look here. Yes, it is. So what happens when an employer violates minimum wage and wage theft? Want to just flag this. It's really important to note the auditor's office has the ability to, and the flexibility to choose, you know, whether it's going to be a minimum wage violation or a wage theft violation, but there's no double dipping allowed here. So we really want to make sure that this is a well-balanced policy. And so, you know, the auditor's office will, if there's a complaint filed, the auditor's office will have the ability to do an investigation and then make a determination of whether it is a minimum wage violation, a wage theft violation, and work from there with the employer. Next slide, please. So more information here about how a worker would file a complaint. The complaint process for wage theft will be established by the auditor in 2023. After this it becomes law, it's got to go through the council process, which takes about 6 weeks. So workers will need to provide their name, a detailed statement of the violation, and any documentation that helps prove the complaint. And I think really important to note here, must be brought within 3 years of the violation. Is there anything that I am forgetting, Anshul, or anything you want to add here as well?
Just one thing to add here. So the ordinance for civil wage theft, like minimum wage, does allow also third-party filing of complaints, in which case you don't need to provide a name or contact information. You just need the detailed statement and the information requested by the auditor.
Perfect. Thank you. Really appreciate that. And then I am going to go back and kick it back to Council President Torres.
Thank you so much. Good work, folks. So what does our timeline for this process look like? Well, we're spending the month of November making sure that folks know what's happening, what are the details of this particular ordinance, how does it relate to minimum wage or any other process that's in place, including the existing city criminal legislation and state legislation. So wanting to make sure folks know what we're trying to address and how. We will be doing another webinar on November 29th, which is a Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. And then we're doing outreach presentations, one-on-one meetings throughout the month as requested. And then what we'd be looking at doing is potentially filing, presenting this in our FinGov committee on December 6th. That meeting would allow for 15 minutes of public comment. And then if it makes it out of committee, then going to council on January 3rd for first reading and January 9th for second reading. We've already agreed that we would like a courtesy public hearing attached to that final meeting with an effective date to be determined. So this is kind of what we are planning toward, and kind of the length of time that we'll be engaging both with community stakeholders as well as our own colleagues. And I believe that is it. We are open for Q&A. If there's a Q&A feature in Zoom, if you would post any questions that you have there, you certainly aren't required to. We've also established an email account for wage theft and a landing page for wage theft on our city page. So you can get all of that information right here through this QR code and bit.ly link. Everything that we're doing, including this Zoom recording, will be made available there. So you can refer folks or watch later again if you needed to refresh on any of the information that was presented. You'll also find there the drafts that we're working from, some information sheets, and additional info on that piece. I don't have any questions coming through in the Q&A right now. I want to just open it up to my colleagues and to Anshul just to see if we missed anything or if you wanted to cover any topic again before we sign off.
I think you guys covered everything that I would have covered, so I'm good.
We did
Excellent.
just get one question, wondering whether there is a statute of limitations.
Great question. And I believe we built in a three-year statute of limitations for any wage theft claim.
And then Councilwoman Torres, you briefly mentioned how this will interact with state and federal wage theft regulation. Can you describe that in more detail?
Sure. So what we're building is basically a gap measure because an administrative function wasn't available in state or the current city criminal wage theft bill. So it wouldn't exactly pick up where any of them may have left off. It's filling a gap so that we have an administrative process for civil wage theft violations in Denver. Anshul, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I think you covered it. So currently the auditor is authorized to enforce violations of minimum wage, which already overlaps with some of the Department of Labor's enforcement of wage theft under the state statute. This would just complement that. So this shouldn't preclude any other agency from doing an investigation or anything like that. So I think that's right, Councilwoman.
Very good. One of the things that I failed to mention earlier when we talked about up the chain liability, I want to make sure folks have the information. Other places have passed up the chain liability laws, including Maryland, Massachusetts, District of Columbia, California, New Jersey, New York, Nevada, Oregon, and several others. So it's definitely not in Colorado and not a municipality in Colorado. So definitely something that we're excited to put into place here. Great. All right. If there isn't any additional questions, we will sign off. We really appreciate everybody joining in. Oh, one question coming in. Katie, do you want to read that
I
out?
can. Uber and Lyft classify drivers as independent contractors and treat them as workers. Would those contractors be able to bring charges despite the arbitration clause?
Anshul, can you help out with that one?
Sure. So to the extent that the worker is a natural person that is being treated like a the language is that the employer is acting in the context of the employer as related to a worker. So if the worker is a natural person like Uber and Lyft drivers are, then theoretically they would be able to. We do have a provision in the ordinance that requires those who are subject to collective bargaining agreements to go through that alternative dispute resolution process. I'm just checking right now, but I don't believe that would apply to an alternative dispute resolution process that was not part of a collective bargaining agreement.
Anshul, I think that's right. We specifically had a discussion about this when working through one of the drafts and with our stakeholders. And so for a worker who has a collective bargaining agreement, they will be required to go through the collective bargaining agreement process first, but it's just a specific arbitration agreement that is not covered by a collective bargaining agreement. That is not something that is addressed here.
So I think long story short, then the answer is yes.
Thank you all for that. Okay, I think this is a good time to end our webinar. I appreciate my colleagues, co-sponsors. Anshul Baga came on in February and has been working diligently on this draft that we've got before us that we're incredibly proud of. And thank you for everyone participating today. We are continuing to spread the word, so we appreciate you helping us do that. And we will see you at our next webinar or a next engagement. Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.